Thanks very much. Let me just share my screen with you all. You should be seeing my slides in a second, if not immediately. There we go. It's good to be with you, and I guess to have the privilege to kick off this series of webinars over 3 days, focusing on micro-credentials, hence my metaphor of putting the micro-credential under the microscope. I've probably got far too much to say and share with you today, so without further ado, let me just get straight into it. I've got 3 things. I have a sort of formula that I use. I'm going to talk about the state of the art very briefly, the state of the actual that probably most of us are experiencing, but I want to do that by drawing on what the research and published literature says. And then I want to stretch out what I'm calling the degrees of separation, some of the tensions, contradictions, and gaps, if you like, in the literature from a recent piece of work that we've completed. I need to acknowledge 3 of my colleagues that have contributed to much of what I'm going to be talking about today in this commissioned work that you'll hear about shortly. But first, the general ethos underpinning this session, this opening session, is if I drill down with the microscope, sometimes we focus on what we see under the microscope, having had a background in science in another career, but sometimes it's the gaps that are more important. And that's really what I want to emphasize today, the gaps, the light coming through the gaps. So right now, actually a little bit of a shameless self-publicity, albeit that we've also promoted the webinar series in this Mooc that is offered this week. Actually is week 2, where the whole focus is on micro-credentials. So I suspect we may have some of the participants in the Mooc Higher Education 4.0 as part of today's program. If not today, then hopefully one of the other sessions. So if you're interested, please do take a look at that Mooc. The state of the art. I'm going to say this a little tongue-in-cheek in some respects. Many of you have heard me talk previously, have possibly seen this slide. I update it every now and again from Google Trends. It depends whether you put a hyphen in micro-credentials and variations with things like digital badges and the like. But generally, what you're seeing is an exponential growth in searches on the term micro-credential. So it gives you a sense in which, I guess, tongue-in-cheek again, this is the hottest new thing in education right now. Certainly from some survey literature, Holden IQ that does quite a lot of work in the think space around higher education, did a survey earlier in the year of higher education leaders. And then from our previous iteration of the Mooc that I just shared with you, you can see roughly from these slides that people think that micro-credentials are only going to get bigger in the next 5 years. So this is sort of the state of the art. I'm not sure if you've come across the sheepskin effect before, but it's often said that higher education has this sheepskin effect in that it really doesn't matter what you study because you're a self-selected sample, the fact that you go off to university in particular, and maybe even what the program is and how well delivered it is less important. What's more important is that you have this qualification, this degree qualification that opens up life opportunities for you. Well, there's an argument right now that the sheepskin effect of higher education is being lost. In fact, in the United States last year, was last year, I'm losing sight of how time flies in the Trump era or post-Trump era. Last year, Donald Trump signed an executive order that for all federal jobs decided that they would focus on skills and not degree qualifications anymore. So this is a sort of example of that sheepskin effect no longer perhaps having the same cloak that it protected students with their career opportunities. And of course, we're all familiar with the fact that there's a new driver in town for micro-credentials around the getting back to work post-COVID era, or as we're still, I guess, in many respects here in Ireland, still in the COVID era, but certainly governments have engaged in micro-credentials for reasons that are linked to getting people back to work. A great example just from September, there are several examples around the world, but this is Alberta in Canada, a provincial initiative with about 5.5 million available for higher education institutions to develop micro-credentials to build skills for the future. Here in Dublin, what we have just recently, I think again, as recently as something around September, I'm going from memory, that Google announced 1,000 scholarships for job seekers to get them back into work with a partnership with Coursera and their Google career certificates. So our Minister of Education actually launched this with great fanfare. It's a great example of providing CPD and giving people opportunities to upskill, to get back into work. So here's another example, of course, outside of the traditional higher education sector. All in all, I think for me, the quote of the year around micro-credentials and establishing the state of the art is that micro-credentials are absolute catnip to politicians and to a large degree for university rectors, university presidents, vice chancellors, whichever term you use in your own institution. So the state of the art has got a lot of rhetoric. Whether it's got a lot of substance, well, let's explore by at least taking a look at the state of the actual. So there's a gap between the state of the art and the state of the actual. I'll push on. I might normally have stopped for some questions then, but I think I'll keep going. I'm on a roll. So the state of the actual, we know, is that there is no globally accepted definition of micro-credentials. Many times we're talking about different things from one jurisdiction, from one institution to another. This work, sponsored by UNESCO, led by Professor Beverly Oliver, as recently as September, a conversation towards defining micro-credentials. Of course, most people, I suspect, in this MOOC, partly because of time zones, will be, in this webinar, will be in the European environment or region. And so we have some advantages in that there has been a quite concerted effort to develop a European approach to micro-credentials, with that conversation continuing. I'm probably telling you most of what you already know. I had the privilege to serve on the high-level reference or expert group that helped to develop a working definition, I think we would say. A year on, we're waiting for some news of further announcements around what the Commission is doing in this space. So I want to spend most of this section of my talk by talking about the work that we've done for the European Commission on contract in not only assisting with the analysis of the public consultations process that took place between April and July of this year, but in doing what was framed as a state-of-the-art literature review on micro-credentials. So the literature review was framed around 10 questions. There's always a risk, the more questions you ask, the more you have to answer. And 5 focus areas or thematic areas: the why, the what, the who, the how, and the where of micro-credentials. So that's the kind of matrix that underpins this piece of work. We adopted what we described as a tripartite research methodology that began with a descriptive analysis, moved into an interpretive analysis, and then ultimately I hope to leave you with some of the critical analysis that we provided. And all of the publications that we looked at were reviewed by 3 separate reviewers. So they went through the cycle of triangulation and a degree of independence in the review process. There's a lot of literature on micro-credentials is what I can say. So one of the biggest challenges is, how did we draw the line? We started from 2015. There was a natural threshold that I won't elaborate why that was a good year, right through to about June of 2021 of this year. In the end, we had to make some choices about how large we would make the sample. And if we added the word open badge, digital badge, the sample got a lot larger and also got a lot harder to figure out what the focus really was, because digital badges are not the same as micro-credentialing. Here's an example from Google Scholar that if we had have included a whole raft of terms there, then the sample could have been up to 8,000 publications. So we kept the sample as tightly as possible because the European Commission also asked us in our inclusion and exclusion criteria to have 2 samples, the general sample of literature and then a secondary sample that we would analyze as high EU relevance. So that's really what drove the sample selection, that we were very conscious of who we were reporting to and for what purpose. The micro-credential observatory that our team actually maintains, really interestingly, full of literature. If you're not familiar with it, I encourage you to take a look. We'll put a link in the chat box at some stage. 87% of the high relevance literature was already in the micro-credential observatory. It's just that we had to go through a sample process to find it. In analyzing the literature, we used quite an extensive data extraction template, all range of categories that we tried to analyze and interpret the literature. I won't share all of them. I'll just give you a bit of the descriptive taste of the literature that we identified. You can see that Canada is a real hothouse for publications and micro-credentials this year. 50% of the publications coming out of Canada. The Europe region also very, very prominent in publications in 2020. The US and Australia perhaps more so in previous years to a large degree. Notably, half the publications have been published in the last year and a half or 18 months. So that tells you and supports my argument that micro-credentials are the next big thing. Just an eye on the time, so I'll keep pushing on here quickly. 85% and 93% of the highly relevant sample were dominated by publications with a higher education institutional focus. What I mean by that is typically universities. Despite Moocs being very important in this space, and I'll elaborate probably shortly, only about 10 to 13% of the publications reflect any initiatives by Moocs. And you can see employers and other stakeholders are relatively minor as far as the focus of the publications in the literature. So some clear gaps, if you like. I know in Ireland, the previous year when we completed a national survey of employers on micro-credentials, the small sample that we investigated, only half of them had ever actually heard of the term. So it really does show that there's a big gap in that space. In terms of degrees of separation, so the final part of the talk, the most important and interesting part, I hope, I've got 5 sort of gaps, 5 tensions or even conflicts that I want to unpack with you. So I won't talk to them on the slide here, I'll just go straight to them. But the first point in the positioning of micro-credentials I want to make is it's really important to understand that there are older forms of micro-credentials and now newer types of micro-credentials. This is a study from Australia showing that in 2019, 2.6 million people had already registered or completed a non-higher education focused a training bundle, not leading to a particular qualification per se, very strongly with a vocational focus. So these could be seen as older micro-credentials, they're particularly in areas of workplace safety, training and things like forklift driving. You could even argue, actually, your driver's license is a form of micro-credential if you look at the definition the Commission has adopted. Here's a great example from Canada. The St. John's Ambulance has been issuing their St. John's certificate in first aid since 1833. Every year, 500,000 Canadians participate and complete this certificate. It's quality assured, it's assessed, it's high currency. In fact, it's so high currency that in 2019, 10,000 jobs advertised in Canada, in Toronto, required you to have this certificate. And then to give you another sense of the gap between older and newer forms of micro-credentials, maybe it's all in the language, because again, a very interesting study from Australia, which asked industries whether they're going to participate in short training programs. You'll see that they all said, to a large degree, they're going to have employees engaged in short courses, but not micro-credentials by and large. So I wonder if this is just the wording. Short courses have been around for a long time. So in the positioning of micro-credentials, we have older and newer types of micro-credentials. We also have different ways that people are interpreting them as to whether they're alternative or just supplementary, or whether they're fully infused or embedded in the higher education system. And that's largely split. And the question I ask most people these days when I get a chance is, where do you see micro-credentials? I know the work that we're doing at DCU, we want to embed them in our credential framework, not just see them as alternative or supplementary. Here, moving on, drivers and attractors. I do have an eye on the time, so I've probably got about 3 or 4 more minutes if I've got the luxury of that and enough time for questions. We did get started a little after time. What I mean by drivers and attractors, one is a bit of a push and the other is a bit of a pull. And so what we did is we analyzed the literature to see what the implicit, the assumed drivers and attractors, because there are only 2 studies that we're familiar with that actually ask what the drivers and attractors are. So we had to probe a little more deeply. You can see that to increase employability is very high as a driver. Similarly, lifelong learning, a little bit lower for the overall sample, but much higher for the highly relevant sample. And then things like increased equity or the neoliberal market force narrative that some people critique are not actually that high at all in the literature. In fact, I have another way of representing this as a spider diagram. And you can see the equity one, or the promote the sustainable development goals, doesn't really register at all. And despite the next 2 articles I'm going to share with you, only around 10% of the publications reflected this kind of neoliberal view of education, treating education as a commodity, if you're not familiar with that language. So here's one of the more notable publications critiquing micro-credentials as just another fad and a new part of the new learning economy. And then this year, this publication saying that they're not at all about inclusion and access to education, but unbundling is about unbundling and blurring boundaries between public and private provision in education. What we would say in response to those publications, they raise very important points, but just as degrees are not created equal, short-term micro-credentials are not all the same. So sweeping generalizations like this are not particularly helpful, to be honest. Moving on to business models and delivery models. This is a nice analysis of the different kinds of models that comes out of the literature: sole unit, peer consortiums, industry-led, and so forth. We actually, in our report on this, identified 8 different business models. I haven't got time to go through each of these right now. You can see on the second slide, some are internal models and others are external partnership models. So we make that distinction there just to go back: in-house approaches, internal ones, and then external partnerships. In terms of those models, here's a very recent initiative, a Deakin almost relaunching their micro-credentials. So this is in the last week since I've grabbed this announcement of their micro-credential stackable short course program. But it's an individual institution. And here in Australia, even Australia, known for being one of the leaders in this area, in a survey of Australian institutions, even in self-report data, they see themselves as relatively immature as institutions. But the key point is the vast majority of the literature reports sole institutional models, just single universities doing things. Whereas the Moocs are forging the path with collaborative partnerships with industry. I've just chosen FutureLearn here, but I could have chosen edX or Coursera to illustrate this point. And then we do have a number of quite notable, I've shared the Alberta initiative here in Ireland. You're going to hear Lynn talk more about the microcreds initiative. This is a different business model with universities collaborating through the Irish Universities Association. So I'll let Lynn elaborate on that. And then another business model that we're involved in at DCU is the ECIU University, where 13 universities, 12 European ones, and then Tec de Monterrey in Mexico, are collaborating to develop micro-credentials across our institutions. We have quite an elaborate ECIU cred model that we've developed, because the micro-credentials are just not individual courses. They're anchored into a conceptual framework of what we're actually trying to achieve. And that's, I think, quite a notable distinction from what you see in some other initiatives. Ultimately, though, moving on with just a few minutes to wrap up, leave some question time. One thing that we found in the literature is a huge focus on the supply of micro-credentials, hence the supermarket metaphor here. This also works with that neoliberal discourse of education being a commodity. So we're seeing more and more supply of micro-credentials. In fact, here's an example from an OECD report just from a few months back, showing the growth in micro-credentials from Mooc providers. We know that each institution is rapidly developing micro-credentials, it seems, around Europe, but we've got less focus on the demand side, why learners and students would want to take up micro-credentials. And this slide comes from a lifelong learning report earlier this year from the OECD that identifies the kind of barriers that we need to understand much better if we want to meet the gaps that we are trying to achieve through micro-credentials. And it's very obvious there's a gender dimension to these barriers, but there are other complex issues as well, including the size of the industry. So I haven't got time to elaborate. The last point I want to make in coming to the conclusion is that whilst we know conclusively that higher education makes a difference both publicly and personally in terms of your life chances and in preparing more educated citizens who can contribute to society, for alternative credentials, they're just not monitored in the same way. Here's an example of the kind of data that we get every year from the publication Education at a Glance that shows you the public and private benefits of education. Ireland has very high private and public benefits. New Zealand, where I'm originally from, actually has very low benefits. Of course, that doesn't tell the full story because New Zealand has a very open market. Ireland doesn't really support part-time learners, so hence they're not showing up in this data. But the point I'm trying to make is that we know very little about the benefits. In this particular study, only 6% of participants who did MicroMasters through edX reported that it helped to give them a pay rise. And that's just the completers. Remember, there's a lot of people who don't complete. So only 6% got a bonus or a pay rise. And hence another study looking at the labor market impact of micro-credentials, particularly Moocs in this case, of which micro-credentials are a subset in the Mooc world. Studying the relationship between Moocs and labour markets is really uncharted water, which is very surprising given we've had Moocs for 10 years. So the sum of it all in terms of micro-credentials and the public and private return on investment is it's essentially a data desert. We just don't know. So wrapping up, whirlwind stop through this research that we've conducted. I've got a final kind of remark to say, well, I've tried to drill down through the microscope to show you what some of the literature has said. Hopefully you can make some connections to what the implications might be for practice, but we shouldn't also lose sight of the bigger picture. And so I want to finish on just letting you know about this global community, a global professional community. If you're interested in micro-credentials, this is a community that has been established only in the last 3 or 4 months for anyone who's interested in micro-credentials to see how we can learn across borders. So I'll stop on that note, other than to say at the micro level, please watch out for this publication that we have as a special issue coming out on micro-credentials early in the new year. And I'm sure I've probably taken far too much time, so I better stop on that note. Thanks very much. Open to take questions as time permits and to see what comments are in the chat box.
Thank you, Mark, for your very interesting and on point, on time presentation. Please, everybody, do you have any question? I saw some complimenting you in the chat. Excellent presentation, Mark, say people. And I don't think that is a question to Mark, but please type if you are shy to talk or talk if you have any question. Christopher has a question for you. Shall I read it, Mark? What do you see as?
I can see that, and yeah, it's a great question, Christopher. In fact, the last webinar for the global community that I just shared with you asked the question, what could possibly go wrong with micro-credentials? I think there's a lot that could go wrong. I mentioned previously about the fact that badges are not the same as micro-credentials, and we can debate that to the cows come home, to mix another animal metaphor in the talk. Essentially, we have to be very careful that ultimately degrees, our macro credentials have currency, just like money has currency, they have value. And if we're not careful, flooding the supply of micro credentials where we still don't quite understand the currency they have, the value, what they mean. This could do great damage. And hence in the ECIU University initiative that we've been involved in, we've spent more than a year trying to work out around our conceptual framework and the back end of how we would get micro-credentials to be collaborating across the 13 partners rather than launch them, because we think that we have to get the message and understand why we want to launch micro-credentials really locked in before we start offering them.
We have another question. What about the micro-qualification?
I'm not sure what the distinction is here. What I know when I rushed through, and I will post a link to my slides in a second as well, so you can go back and people can look at them. Conscious I would probably had, as I said, too much to talk about. How you define micro-credentials to some degree is going to answer that question. What is a micro-qualification? I'm aware of some institutions that have defined a micro-credential as simply taking the individual modules that make up a degree and choosing some of those and saying, here's our micro-credentials. Other institutions are seeking to develop partnerships with industry or partnerships through Mooc providers. I really think that the Mooc providers are not getting enough airtime right now for some of the most interesting work that's going on in this space. Partly it's because collaboration is much easier. It's not constrained by university structures and systems. But the issue of what is a micro qualification, I guess, is what we're debating today. And we're probably going to take 2 more days or 3 more days to do so.
So true, Mark. I would say if we have okay, I see your link. So Mark is leaving the floor to the next speaker. So here in the chat, you can find, I think it's the link to the literature review, Mark?
That link takes you to a lot of the literature. I will post a link to an article that's coming out shortly with the literature review, but the full 55,000 word report that we produced for the Commission probably won't get published until early new year. I'm hoping it'll be this year, but it will be quite a comprehensive read when it's available.
Thank you. So I see that Shira has a question for Mark, but we don't have time. Sorry, Shira. Please take the time to see the address of Mark. You can contact him or us, and then we share the question with him. So I give the floor now to Lynn Ramsey from the Irish Association, University Association. Please, Lynn, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alessandra. I'll just share my screen. We can see that now. Okay, that should be up now, yes? Thank you. Okay,
yes, you're on.
Thanks, Alessandra. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks to Mark for an excellent presentation. Really interested to hear the work going on there. And thanks in particular to IATU for the invitation to join today in the first of your series of really interesting discussions and events focused on micro-credentials. So my presentation today will consider the experience of 7 of our Irish universities working collectively through the Microcreds project. This is a 5-year, 12.3 million project, which has been funded under the Human Capital Initiative. These are monies drawn down from the National Training Fund, and it's probably useful to know a little bit about the National Training Fund because it contextualizes some of our approaches and the way we have been working. So the National Training Fund was established by the National Training Fund Act in 2020, and it's a dedicated fund to support the training of those in employment and those seeking employment. And the Act also provides for the funding of research to provide information on existing and likely future skills requirements of the economy. So that's a bit of a backdrop to the work that we're doing. So the presentation today will share some insights, which I hope will be useful from Ireland on what is a national approach to micro-credentials. It's a national approach with a particular European focus. So I'll share our progress on the creation of the national framework for micro-credentials to date. We're in truth at a fairly early stage. Our initial work has focused upon learners who wish to reskill, upskill, or change careers, although we're cognizant that what we'll do is create an overarching framework for micro-credentials, which could have a much broader focus, particularly in terms of access, entry to, and movement through undergraduate degrees. Our initial work has focused on piloting with enterprise engagement, and I'll talk you through the methodology we're approaching there, because we seek to bring together this future skills data, enterprise, the public sector, and the academia to co-design innovative micro-credentials. So I'm really looking forward to our discussion today, and maybe to share with you how we situate our microcreds work within the wider context of lifelong learning. So we're working with 7 university partners. You'll see them there on your screen. So we work with University College Dublin, University College Cork, the University of Limerick, Trinity College Dublin, the National University in Galway, Maynooth University, and of course DCU, and Mark was chatting through some of the DCU work there. So it's true to say all of the universities have established and developing practices in short courses, in CPD, in executive education, and so on. So this work isn't taking place in a vacuum, nor is it building on a complete standstill or a no starting point. So microcreds has 4 interconnected strands. And what's both interesting and very challenging is that these strands are developing in parallel using an iterative approach. So each strand has a number of piloting phases. Those piloting phases inform and shape the parallel strands as they're developing. So for us, collaboration, transparency, mutual respect and trust, and I suppose the ability to have the desire to innovate and to try new things are essential at every stage. And the 4 strands are there for you: developing a national framework, developing a dynamic and sustainable model of enterprise engagement as it relates to micro-credentials, the developing of a discovery platform which is linked to a learner-focused digital credentialing solution. So we're working with Europass as an early adopter. And then the 4th strand is that in each of the universities, they are developing an agilely developed and flexibly delivered suite of micro-credentials. So I'd like to focus today on 3 aspects of our micro-credentials work, which I hope will provide participants with some insights into our approaches and some of our emerging learning on micro-credentials. And the 3 areas of focus are as follows: the strategic prioritization and governance piece, which I think helps shapes and grounds our work, the fact that we're working through a piloted approach, and then I'll talk to you in a little bit of detail about what our approach to enterprise collaboration has been. So I might begin by focusing on strategic prioritization, on governance and organizational structures, and indeed on wider stakeholder engagement. And the ambition for a more flexible approach to reskilling and upskilling is a priority for the government in Ireland, for enterprises in Ireland. And I'd say, and particularly Mark's shared with us a lit review, this is consistent with a policy and practice which is developing internationally. What is equally evident from our perspective is that Irish universities have called out their own commitment to lifelong learning at a strategic level. So all 7 of our universities partners have expressed commitments to lifelong learning in their strategic plans. And indeed, one of our partners, Trinity College Dublin, has an explicit commitment to exploring micro-credentialing strategies in order to meet what they describe as a manifest and growing demand from alumni and lifelong learners. Our project at its inception was supported by all 7 university presidents, and our governance structures reflect this prioritization of micro-credentials at the more senior levels within our universities. And I think this level of embeddedness is significant, particularly as we progress through the more challenging aspects of the project. We have a steering committee, which is comprised of leaders and directors in all 7 universities, members of the Irish Universities Association, and the chair of our Enterprise Advisory Group. We also have a project leads group and an enterprise advisory group, which I'll talk to you in a little more detail. And we also have the ability to set up ad hoc groups at senior or strategic levels within the university. So for example, we set up in June of this year a senior technical leads group, and they are helping us work through the scoping required for our discovery portal. Our project is one of 16 projects funded under the Human Capital Initiative approach. And it's one of 16 which expressly refer to micro-credentials. So we liaise very closely with these projects. It's also worthwhile mentioning today that there's a parallel project or a sister project around recognition of prior learning, which is funded through the Human Capital Initiative, and it has synergies for the work we undertake in microcreds. We're also really actively engaged with on a regular basis with key stakeholders at a national level. So for us, that involves QQI, the Higher Education Authority, our Department of Further and Higher Education, the National Forum of Teaching and Learning, and so on. And at a European level and an international level, we're working closely with the European Commission and Europass, and indeed a number of the European University Alliances. In fact, we had a really good meeting with Enlight consortia yesterday, particularly looking at synergies between our approach in the Discovery Portal and what they're looking to do in terms of their work. We're also working very closely and focusing very closely on global developments, particularly across New Zealand, Australia, the US and Malaysia. And it's true to say everyone is at an early stage, but there's a good spirit of collaboration, I think, globally emerging, which is really heartening. I'm based in the Irish Universities Association, and I lead this project from there, working with our project officer, Dr. Emma Francis. And we work with all of our stakeholders and our groups, but we work particularly closely with our 7 project leads. We're very lucky in that each of the universities has a full-time project lead based in their own institutions. So we've got Katrina Nagivell in DCU, Susanna Zarka in Maynooth University, Brian O'Donoghue in NUI Galway, Deirdre Harkin in Trinity College Dublin, Mags Arnold in UCC, Circa Mulcahy in UCD, and Sarah Brady in UL. So please do connect with them if you're interested in finding out more about how microcredits are developing within a particular university. And I think Mags Arnold, in fact, is in the webinar today, so I'm sure Mags will be available for any questions also. We're very lucky to have a high-level enterprise advisory group who meet with us on a really regular basis. They advise us on key aspects of our work, and the group comprises enterprise representative bodies and agencies, and also leading companies such as Microsoft. And we have very large organizations represented, but also small and medium-sized enterprise represented within that. Tony Donoghue chairs the group, and the insights that emerge from that group are shared with our steering group and our project leads to sense check the work as we go. And that's some of our enterprise advisory group members there. Others are more camera shy, so we don't have their images to share with them, but you can find their details on our project website. So in order to progress our work and foreground our work, we have developed out what we call a 4-element universal vision. And this vision is framing our initial 12-month pilot phase, which kicked off towards the end of June this year. Our university partners are working within this enabling framework as they do pilot micro-credentials. So they're examining and stress testing what we sometimes think of as the building blocks for micro-credentials. They're looking at the quality assurance considerations. They're looking at the impact on university student records systems and application systems and registration systems, and also looking at what it means for innovative approaches to teaching and learning. And we have built in an interim review for this initial pilot phase, which we're kicking off in December. This is really important for us. It'll give the universities an opportunity to pause and reflect on progress, gather learnings from the initial phase, and these will inform and shape progress and key decisions which we undertake as a collective. So you can see there the 4 elements to our universal vision. The first is a working definition. The second is the core values that underpin our work. The third is a constituent element of a micro-credential within the microcreds context. And the fourth is a common supplement, which is akin to the diploma supplement that you'll all be very familiar with. So we are working under the European Commission draft definition, which will be very familiar, I'd say, to everyone on this session today. We're mindful, of course, of the anticipated recommendation from the European Commission to Council. We're also very cognizant of the excellent work of Microbol. The draft definition has provided us with both a degree of clarity in terms of how we communicate a micro-credential, but also a good degree of flexibility as we work through this pilot phase. I'll not bother reading out the definition there. I'm sure it's very familiar to many of you today. We have 7 core values that form the second element of our vision, and they underpin our microcreds work. And you can see that they're centered around this conception of leadership in lifelong learning. The other values that flank it are dynamic enterprise collaboration, tackling economic and societal challenges, excellence and innovation, inclusivity, flexibility and agility, and a learner focus. And that leadership and lifelong learning is central and foregrounded in the university strategic plans, and equally central and foregrounded in terms of our work. So when we talk about leadership and lifelong learning, for us, it means that cultural change in how and when learners engage with university learning, and also that cultural change in how universities, enterprise, and civil society partners collaborate. So I'd like to turn now to consider the third element of our universal vision, and these are the constituent elements of our definition, if you like, of a micro-credential. And you'll see that they provide for that flexibility and approach in that pilot phase. So our universities have a diverse range of disciplinary areas and research specialisms, and it's in truth all have established approaches to the delivery and development of short programs or short units of learning, and whether that's in the field of executive education, in continuing professional development for professional bodies, or indeed short upskilling courses which have been developed in partnership with industry. The micro-credentials which are being developed under the microcreds banner are offered in a variety of modes. So from fully online to blended, fully in person, and obviously also encompassing a hybrid delivery. So both synchronous and asynchronous elements are evident in what's emerging. So we're piloting these quality assured micro-credentials from levels 7 to 10 within the Irish National Framework of Qualifications. So that's from bachelor to master's right through to doctoral levels. We're working on a credit range of between 1 and 30 ECTS as a sliding scale. And as I mentioned, we're about to kick off our interim review for the framework, which will provide us with very rich learning. What is working well? What are the challenges and barriers? Where are universities in terms of this journey towards a clear constitutive element and understanding? The fourth element in our vision is the development of a common supplement for microcreds, micro-credentials. We think this will be crucial to the development of our work in the Discovery portal, crucial to the development of our work with Europass on the Digital Credentialing Initiative, and indeed fundamental to any hopes of stacking and portability of the micro-credentials. And the work on that fourth element is going to begin in earnest next year. It's fair to say that within the Irish context, we're very lucky that the Bologna tools and framework are already well embedded and well accepted. So that provides us with a good jump start when we're talking about those constitutive elements, but also talking about the common supplement. So the final area that I'd like to focus on today and to share with you is our development of a sustainable model for enterprise engagement within the context of micro-credentials. We're piloting a model which is grounded in an evidence-based approach to skills gaps, future skills needs, and so on. And an approach which values the expertise both of enterprise and also the expertise that lies within universities, and hopes to bring together the right people in order to collaborate on the development of micro-credentials. So we have 3 pilots that we're working through in this first phase. The first pilot is on zero carbon, the second is on digital transformation, and the third is a deep dive into the work of SMEs. The first pilot that looks at zero carbon is going to examine the data and the findings that are arising from the report of the expert group on future skills on zero carbon. This is a targeted analysis on certain aspects of enterprise, And our aim is to bring together the key decision makers from industry with senior managers and leading researchers from the universities, first of all, to consider the data in this report and for us to sense check that we have a shared understanding on what the data is telling us and a common language to describe what the data is telling us. And then we'll work together to ask a number of questions. So we'll be asking our enterprise partners to consider before they come to us what the data is telling you about your own priorities for reskilling, upskilling, and for attracted, talented employees. And we'll be asking university partners to consider, thinking about the data, what insights are there from your research and from a university knowledge perspective, which could be transformative to the data challenges presented. And we'll be asking groups to come together then to prioritize where action might take place. The next step through these focus days or focus workshops will be asking the partners to identify opportunities for collaboration, to name out the barriers and think about what could be done to address them, and then to think about what the characteristics of our building blocks would have to be. What would flexibility mean within the context of this enterprise engagement model? We're hearing really interesting things from enterprise about what flexibility means, and it really is grounded in that idea of allowing learners work at their own speed, in their own time, at their own pace, and to have a lot more flexibility and choice in terms of what they uptake. And I think at the outset, we thought about flexibility in a quite a different way, or maybe a more nuanced way. So there's interesting learning emerging. As a project team, we'll evaluate this pilot, and we'll have some follow-up impact analysis work that Emma Francis will lead on, and then we'll refine and revise our subsequent pilots and develop out from that. So thank you very much for listening. I'm mindful of time, so I might move to a close now. It's great to have the opportunity to share our emerging work with colleagues here today. Please do keep in touch with Microcred, so you can follow us on Twitter and on LinkedIn with the at IUA Microcreds, #MicrocredsIE. And my own contact details are there, but I'll also share them in the chat in case anyone wants to get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn, for this presentation. I hope I did type correctly your contact for Twitter on the IUA, but please feel free to type it anew. Any question? There is Emma Francis writing something. Let me. Okay, no, she just posted. Yeah. Do you have any question, people? Please type. I give it some second. Do you want me to read for you, or you prefer? Thanks for the interesting presentation. I believe you mentioned a light. If so, could you expand a bit on that link?
Surely. We had initial, and Emma was involved in that meeting also. She's here today, meeting with the NUI Galway colleague working on one of the European Universities Association collaboration on InLight. It's a consortium of universities looking at an opportunity to share modules across undergraduate programs. And what was interesting from us is they're looking to develop that on a modular, but perhaps potentially micro-credential basis, and also to share that learning or the opportunities for learning for students across a platform. And so the scoping work that they had done in terms of the platform development was very similar to the stage we are at within micro-credentials in terms of our scoping work for a discovery platform, because as you can imagine, they and we are looking to bring together uploads from a diverse catalogue potentially within the universities and a diverse number of systems. So what the integration looks like and what the integration looks like from the data on a way that can be sustained was of a lot of interest to us.
Nice. We have another question. Will you be publishing the data from industry on their needs?
Yes, a really interesting question. Yeah, so before we commenced the project, the IUE undertook a study to understand enterprise prioritization in terms of understanding of micro-credentials and what micro-credentials might look at like for them. Our focus in terms of the initial pilot work is to use existing data, but to take a deeper dive into it. So the expert group of future skills needs data that we're looking at in the first instance of our pilot will be data that will be shared. It's an open publication, but we'll have the opportunity to really focus in those aspects that talk to higher education. And from our workshop, we'll be developing out those insights and they will be shared as we go through the project.
Perfect. I see people connecting, but there is a question from Shira, so this time we do it. What were the driving forces behind taking a national approach? He's asking.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question and a really good question. I think one of the things that we found when we were doing our analysis, particularly with learners, is that universities are well known for full undergraduate provision and postgraduate provision, but perhaps not well known for work that's happening in the short course area. And I think the benefits of us working as a collective is that it speaks to that challenge of what the micro-credential is. It speaks to having a shared definition and a shared understanding. And I think that's the strength of having a national approach.
I see another question, if you are not tired, Lynn. People are very interested.
That's great. No, it's great to hear the questions.
Okay. Do university want partners to create micro-credential? How do we engage?
That's a great question. I think the universities are very open to engaging with partners. So absolutely, if Colin would like to get in touch with us, we can connect him with whoever the right person may be us, or it may be colleagues in the universities. So it's fair to say our university partners are collaborating with each other, but they're also very actively collaborating with other partners also. So yes, absolutely. You can contact us through any of the channels that we've shared.
Are there any other question? Otherwise, I have one.
Go on. What's your question, Alessandra?
Okay, so I am more interested because of other projects we have of how does work with you and the how you call it? Let me read. Sorry, the enterprise advisory group. You said you involve them very often, and yeah, if you could share more about that, because it was more a personal interest.
No, and it's a really good question. So we met with our enterprise advisory group formally as a collective 5 times this year. So when we have key parts of the work, we bring them a progress update, and then we also bring key parts of work, but we always bring an ask for them. So we ask them to input on key stages of development. So for example, the enterprise engagement model that I shared with you, we brought to sense check with them, and they're supporting us both in terms of the model, but also in terms of saying, we can bring key stakeholders to that meeting. We know who the people are who work in that area, so they're very well connected. That's one thing that they do. And then outside of those meetings, we sometimes have questionnaires that we share with them, or we have one-on-one meetings with them where the work relates specifically to an area of focus. And what we do is then we bring the insights from that group back to steering, and we bring it back to the project leads group. So there's a sort of reciprocal piece happening. One of the things we have been discussing is that it would be really helpful to bring the steering group and the project leads together as a collective periodically, and we have quite a large group, so it would be nice to do that in person. So we're hoping if and when we're allowed to do that, we might do it in that way, so there's more of a kind of dialogue. But we found it to be a really useful group, Alessandra, and be happy to chat with you offline in more detail about how it works.
Yes, I think me and George come back on this to you. Very
perfect. We're happy to share my idea.
But I would really thank you. Unfortunately, there is not the clap. Otherwise, we would have done also for Mark before Zoom limit, online meeting. So I see George that is ready, and so maybe you can share again, Lynn, your contact, then people can see, but anyhow we will put them also on YouTube and on our slide share with your presentation. Thank you. So George, if you're ready, we are. The floor is yours.
Thanks. Yes, and I think it's really good opportunity to have this week, especially now, so in the midst of November, just a month before the European Commission comes with the recommendations for the Council of Ministers. And this week with different focuses on theory as well as opportunities of implementation and related challenges coming by this in this webinar week of micro-credentials. And I hope I can contribute to that by just sharing with you, one moment, a bit of the work we are doing at, can you see this? I hope.
Yes, it's visible, yeah.
Yeah. The work of ED2 and the European Mooc Consortium, which is coordinated by ED2. But I first want to talk a bit about short learning programs, then the common micro-credential framework and modularity, and reflecting on the question, what could possibly go wrong? I think we will come to that later, but first look at the opportunities offered by the shorter programs, shorter flexible programs, which micro-credentials are. So first, we worked with within ED2 and mainly our open universities network all over Europe. We worked on short learning programs with a focus on the question of what our society requires learning for our lifespan, with the purpose of improving our knowledge, skills, competencies within personal, civic, social, and employment-related perspectives. It is about the addressing educational programs that are needed, and we see that not every student learner has the ambition of working towards a full degree, as well as the market needs show that there is an increasing need for shorter, flexible programs. More flexible, shorter programs, size and value of the programs make it more attractive for the need for upskilling and reskilling. But you see that at this moment, the offerings are can be divided in two. It's full programs, maybe part-time programs that are accredited, and non-accredited modules and courses. And that can also be a problem in a sense that they are in the incentive for learners also to follow these courses, and also related to the offerings by higher education institutions that have a lot to offer in that sense, and have to become more part of the shorter program offerings providers. What we envisage is also that not only supporting the continuing education market by more flexible online programs of good quality, that these provisions also become fully fledged area of higher education, and also therefore funded as a public good. So find also the business models, also the funding for a strengthened market of continuing education. And we therefore believe that universities in the future will grow from mainly degree education to incorporate continuing education and open education. From the stakeholders' perspectives, the focus at leadership level is therefore to develop and extend continuing education and professional development, including also the necessary institutional frameworks and conditions. For employers, the focus therefore is on knowledge and skills updating of staff, upskilling and reskilling. As for the learners, it is creating more restricted structure, workload flexibility, and study work-life balance. And we envisage that for teaching staff, this entails also design of continuing education for the staff to develop new modes of teaching in continuing education. And for the governments, we envisage the establishment of more national and EU frameworks for continuing education and professional development in line and incorporating it in the Bologna tools. So these are some kind of stakeholder preconditions. Why shorter programs, or maybe online shorter programs? Not only as they respond better to the time horizon of the target group of learners that are not necessarily look for a full degree, but more for shorter programs, but also to make it possible to have these courses and educational units more stackable, which motivates students to continuously further study towards programs up to specializations and diplomas, and maybe even to a degree. It stimulates modularity of higher education, bringing the knowledge of higher education institutions, breaking them down into smaller programs and therefore fit for continuing education, which is actually an extension of the current offerings of higher education, and promote the recognition of continuing education programs. What that means from our short learning programs project was that we have agreed to develop learning building blocks that are stackable, of a size which is here still quite wide, I believe, from 5 to 30 ECTS at academic level, and provided by higher education institutions, delivered online and blended mode, as I said, stackable, but important also including a document that details the main characteristics of the program and the learning outcomes, the achievements of the student, and of course, a good reference to the quality assessment. So examples of what is the outcomes of this project on the short learning programs you can find here, and these slides will be shared, as well as guidelines to develop short learning programs. What is now important that what we have done in addition, partly in parallel to the short learning programs, is that we, as EDTU, as the coordinator of the European Mooc Consortium, have brought together the MOOC platforms, the main MOOC platforms in Europe, like FutureLearn, Fun in France, Myriad X in Spain, iMOOCs in Austria, EduOpen in Italy, to come together and not only sharing expertise of building MOOCs, but also looking on how the MOOC providers, together with the universities, can connect to labor market stakeholders and offer micro-credentials to the labor market. So EMC developed a common micro-credential framework in response to the question how to harmonize the current wide variation of certificates offered in higher education, which lead to confusion and challenges related to recognition. And also this morning, we talked in relation to with the NARIC institution and so about recognition. It is currently very difficult when you see that the continuing education market is only served by badges and certificates now and before, which is very difficult to identify the value of the certificates, which are by wide indication smaller than a full degree. Also, there are some definitions that indicate micro-credentials being smaller than a degree. We, on the other hand, think that to clarify a real qualification for continuing education, we need micro-credentials as a qualification for smaller units. The bachelor master structure is well organized, as well as the PhD, but the continuing education market is not served by qualifications that fit the efforts done by learners and the clarification and transparency needed for employers to know what learners have learned in their educational career. So here you see an overview of the diversity, the confusing diversity of what is offered now under different names. And here we have agreed in the common micro-credential framework of the MOOC providers in Europe that a CMF micro-credential has to live up to a 150 hours workload, so average of 5 ECTS at a European qualification framework level 5 to 8. It also needs to have a transcript, a diploma supplement on the specification of the learning outcomes, and also an indication of the reliable method of IT verification. So this is really needed to make it also to be recognized for recognition, and therefore also serving the stackability with other micro-credentials. So the recognition is here a very important element. I must say also that the importance of having this developed by the MOOC providers in Europe is important because it is more than just a project of a few partners, of a few institutions. The MOOC providers in Europe represent in total 400 higher education institutions. So by the endorsement of this common micro-credential framework, we have a wider impact in Europe. And at this moment, the MOOC providers are discussing with the universities to develop as much as possible MOOCs in line with the CMF, to have these as a dedicated offering on their MOOC platforms, which is recognizable for the learners and employers as a CMF awarded provision of micro-credentials. So the micro-credential actually adds as a qualification and the quality mark. So third parties can be assured that this person actually masters the knowledge and skills associated with the micro-credential. The achievements of these learning outcomes are traceable, verifiable, and not yet, but possibly a national registration can be made of who has achieved which micro-credential. You create also more control by developing a path, an educational path in combination with different programs and stackability of programs. You can be assured the learning outcomes achieved will also be recognized somewhere else. Especially here, you can think also about not only the other organizations under the institutions under the MOOC platforms and ED2, but also by incorporating that within the European University Alliances, there could potentially be included and recognized. And the size and value of micro-credentials can be made, make it more attractive to specialize and upskill. It is actually really the missing qualification for continuing education. A further important in summary for a short learning program, a micro-credential, is, of course, first of all, the quality. That is, the trust and quality is more or less covered by higher education institutions, which is less by other offerings of non-formal education. But here we are talking about academic programs with ECTS. So it is already an indication of quality, and also the reputation of the university is important here. Recognition is important to the value of a program, as well as relevance, not only as relevance for the educational career development of a learner, but also the relevance for the need of expertise for a company. All these three are important for an offering to be of value. Now coming to modularity. Sorry. We can distinguish two ways of modularization. One, and that's most common, is breaking down existing bigger programs that are currently offered in the bachelor-master system to smaller units. You cannot do that one-on-one. You need to adapt these smaller units also to the needs of the market. So it's not just a course of a bachelor-master program is not by definition a micro-credential. A micro-credential should also be relevant for the needs of the market. So breaking down existing programs and also building new programs by developing new short learning programs that can build up to a bigger program. In both cases, you can think about stackability, but stackability has an added value, but not necessarily a prerequisite of a micro-credential. But it's an added value, so very important, and pre-stackability is an important aspect here to be included as a pathway. So think about stacking a new program to another program for the student to build to a specialization or diploma. As for the first format, and breaking down bigger programs, the stackability is more or less included in the definition. What not should be, I think what's confusing in the discussion of modularization at the moment is that what I see in different communities is that they are now thinking about breaking down and modularize the bachelor-master structure. I don't think that is on the agenda. On the agenda is micro-credentials serving the continuing education market, need for more short, flexible programs, and therefore you need these smaller units of education and modularization of existing programs, but not necessarily modularization of the bachelor master system, because that is already functioning quite well. So these it's quite confusing that some believe that is part of the discussion. Micro-credentials need to be responsive and therefore to be developed in close collaboration with the labor market stakeholders, with companies. And within the project, the European Mooc Consortium for the Labor Market, we are doing just that. We are bringing those labor market stakeholders together and are discussing the ways of informing each other on what is needed. So first of all, part of this co-creation of providers with external stakeholders, you need the needs analysis, co-creation, course evaluation, internships, and so on. These are all elements we are currently exploring, and we have a policy forum on that with all stakeholders present on the 15th of December, if you're interested in micro-credentials for the labor market. Coming to conclusions, I here have an overview on how to, this is a vision on how micro-credentials can contribute to the shaping of the continuing education qualifications structure by combining what is already there and what we envisage will be new. So first of all, you have learning units, you have micro-learning, which is supported by badges and proof of attendance. Then we have single courses, and these single courses are served by certificates often of achieved credits. We think you should keep that up to 3-4 ECTS and then work with micro-credentials. Micro-credentials is then the first real formal qualification of an average of 5 ECTS, which could be building blocks to a second layer of qualification on micro degrees. And micro degrees in total can work towards a degree program. We think that the layers in this system serves what is now currently offered by universities. When discussing with universities what volume they would like to provide, some cannot go lower than about 30 ECTS, as others believe that they can go lower, but need a minimum of about 5 ECTS to really give a qualification. Currently, we're also looking into the 12 ECTS as an in-between layer, as there is a lot of demand on 12 ECTS offerings. But this, in our vision, would the offerings of qualifications would serve the continuing education market. Recommendations as conclusions here at the institutional level is that institutions need to build a consistent institutional qualification structure. They have to think about how to build that in their efforts to next to degree education, also offering continuing education. We need to stimulate multilateral agreements between institutions on common qualifications framework, develop in collaboration with the labor market stakeholders medium and long-term strategic plan, and also work with, in a dialogue, set up a structure of dialogue with the labor market stakeholders, and start recognizing micro-credentials and short learning programs for through credential evaluation and networks and alliances, so that we have like semi-automatic recognition between institutions. And finally, at governmental level, they need to engage in a dialogue with higher education institutions to fulfill on the recommendations by the European Commission on micro-credentials expected next month, collaborate with universities and stakeholder groups, and build a kind of a new lifelong ecosystem. And of course, think about improving the financing of micro-credentials and SLPs to support continuing higher education. That's my contribution. Thanks. And I have to find the...
You can stop sharing the screen, George. Thank you for your contribution. Any question? We have a question. How many learning hours estimated for one ECT?
It's about 30, yeah? It's about learning hours for one ECTS credit. It depends a bit by country, but it's an average of 30.
Thank you. Any other question? Can somebody type it? You can also talk if you feel like. Let's give time to people to type.
Yeah, the demand for 12 ECTS. Well, this well, the reasoning behind 12 ECTS is the other way around. It's not like what would the perfect size of a micro-credential be, because there we see that it's mostly 5 ECTS. But when you look at the current offerings of universities and smaller programs, it seems to be that 12 ECTS is quite a common size that universities offer as one of their smallest units of offering. But we hope by offering programs within the Common Micro-Credential Framework that even those will be cut up and then into so offering 5 ECTS micro-credentials, because that would be ideal. It's already quite a commitment, huh? Up to 100 to 150 study hours, but still manageable, of course.
Any other question? I'm checking the chat. At the moment, there are none.
Raised hand from Patricia, I think.
Yeah.
Yes. Hi, do you hear me?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
I have a question about continuing. I'm working in continuing education. So everybody says micro-credentials are something for continuing education, but in your model, these micro-credentials, they add up to become a bachelor or a master degree or a doctorate. And isn't it contradictory with continuing education as such? Because here in Switzerland, we have a system for continuing education that's based on ECTS credits, the same, it's 25 average, 25 to 30 hours of teaching or learning. And we have a certificate of advanced studies. It's from 10 ECTS up to 20, 25. You have diploma of advanced studies, it's 30 ECTS to 40 ECTS, and master of advanced studies. Typically, MBA is a master of advanced studies in Switzerland. And so I don't understand why micro-credentials should add up to a bachelor or master degree. That for me is the base. I mean, you know, education, we call it the first degree of education, first, second degree.
No, you're right. What the model shows is not necessarily the stackability up to a full degree of a bachelor master. It is showing from the smallest to the biggest unit. So the overview shows what is the biggest, the highest qualification, and the lowest, which is a batch, so to say, in volume. And so you should not consider the overview that I showed as pure stackable towards a bachelor or master. I'm just indicating that you could use the micro-credential to be stackable to a micro degree. And I know some other groups argue that it can also be used up to a bachelor master, but that is not what I'm implying in this schedule. It's more that is the size indication from qualifications. No.
That's because you don't have these qualifications for continuing education. I mean, in Europe, I mean, Switzerland is in Europe.
If I leave the bachelor master out, then in this overview, then you would have all qualifications in continuing education. A badge, the credits, then you have the micro-credential and the micro-degrees. But also then some ask, what about the certificates, which are not, the programs which are not in compliance with the micro-credentials? They actually coexist. It's not that the micro-credentials will take over all the other offerings, but they will coexist. And I can imagine that some students prefer a micro-credential above a certificate. They can choose specifically for a micro-credential, but certificates will coexist next to micro-credentials.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. If any other person feel free to talk, the floor is still available. Don't be shy. You can also talk without the camera on.
There's also on the implementation, for which we're going to talk tomorrow further, and also Friday morning. Alessandro, you will present the portal for Moocs for the labor market. So it's really about connecting then at some point also the offerings in relation to what the labor market needs. So it's not just theory, it's also then
I'm happy you mentioned the portal, because I saw very fast in your slide that you mentioned the portal for a short learning program that is already online. We could share the link of that. So one of the things developed during the ESLP project was indeed the portal. I'm gonna write the link here. Yep. So if somebody make question, please, Stefan or George, read.
Yeah, indeed, we could visualize it differently. This was more in size, not about the road of stackability or so, but and there you have the link to the short learning programs portal. And we will also present to you, I think Friday morning, the portal for the Moocs. And both portals serve the same target group of continuing education by short online programs. The other one is by online programs as such, and the other one has Moocs.
Exactly. Yeah. So maybe, George, you could share your, we have a question. I totally agree. No. Maybe you could share your email. I can also, and people can also contact us, follow us via Twitter. We have this contact of EDTU. And Stefan, what is for Facebook and LinkedIn? I think it is everywhere like that at EDTU. Any other remarks? Otherwise, we are sharp on time to actually, we have some minutes before the ending of the.
Yeah, announce for tomorrow, the program of tomorrow. Who is speaking tomorrow? If you have that, is it under the table? Oh, yeah.
Sorry, my earplug just fall from my ear and I couldn't hear anything that you said.
No, it's maybe interesting for those as a closing for today is to announce the speakers of tomorrow and also who is in the panel on Friday morning. So if you have
definitely give me a sec. As I said, all fall. I did share the link this morning and now I cannot find it. So I go by memory. So we have, and thank you, Stefan, great. So we have for tomorrow morning, Matt Jenner from FutureNet that is going to present. Then we have a representative of Una Europa, Maya Urpanen, and Francisco Iniesto from OU UK, and Frederick Truyen from Leuven, that will present more a practical approach and a practical lesson learned from a micro-credential. And the last day, which is not the least important, it will be the panel session that is the final. So it is on November 19th. So you have a day of stop and then we come back, and it will be moderated by Liz Marr. And the panelists are Lynn, that you also have the pleasure to hear today, Deborah Arnold from the National International, that is from UNEG, sorry, Yannick Lokhoff from the Dutch National Agency of Erasmus Plus, called NAFIC, and then from the European Commission, I hope I pronounce well, is Jan Mel Bidot, if it's French, I don't know. I apologize if I didn't say correctly. I will learn the right pronunciation. So I hope you enjoy. You can find the record of these events on our website, and then all the PowerPoint will be shared also on our SlideShare account. There are other final remarks. Ulf, you could also say that. It was a remark probably of what Patricia said about what is the Sweden. Okay, any other final remarks? Something I forgot, Stefan, George?
No, I think it's a nice roundup.
Okay, so I really thank you all for being here. You were very numerous. At a certain point, I counted 74 participants. Many good thank you to Mark, to Lynn, and to George for the very inspiring presentation. And if we will have a question for you, we will come back and we really thank you. So, yeah. Stefan, if you want to add something, George, please feel free.
Hope to see you tomorrow.
I want to say that tomorrow we start at 2, and Friday, please know that we start in the morning at 10 o'clock. So if you come at 2 on Friday, you're too late. So
exactly. There is a change in time. On tomorrow, we have the same time of today. And on Friday will be in the morning, the sessions. Always we speak of European time. Okay. Thank you. And all the best. Have a nice evening. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now.
Bye.